everyone. Welcome to another interview with Doing Sociology. Today, we are extremely honored to have Dr. Gaurav Pathania with us. Gaurav holds a doctorate in Sociology of Education from JNU. He is currently teaching sociology at Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. He has previously taught social movements at George Washington University and also served as a visiting scholar to the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and as a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Southern California. He has authored the book, The University as a Site of Resistance, Identity and Student Politics, which has been published by the Oxford University Press in 2018. He is also serving currently as an assistant editor of South Asia Research, which is published by the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, University of London. So welcome, Gaurav. We are very grateful to have you. Thank you for taking time out for this.
Thank you, Rituparna, and thank you, Deepali, and thank you for doing sociology. It's always a pleasure to meet someone from the alma mater, and yeah, I am really glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we'll begin. I begin the interview by first posing this question that you have studied universities as sites of resistance in India and how they've actually been these spaces where social movements have developed. So, first of all, why do you think that universities are these important centers which lead to social movements? And again, do you see any change in the discourse of student politics in Indian universities in recent years? And why do you think, if there is a change, and what has led to that change? And could you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, thank you, Rituparna. This is a very interesting question, and it's the most burning questions of the time, because if you see around the globe, it's the students who are leading or making the university as a space of resistance. So now, when we're talking about the book and also a little bit of a background about why and why this issue is very important, because as a social movement scholar, when I look at the university, now the literature on social movements reflects especially in the Western student politics, it had a profound influence on the student politics of the global South as well since the 1960s. Now, this 1960s era with the whole anti-Vietnam War or anti-war movements, youth movements, free speech movements, LGBT, or feminist movement. All of these movements were started in the university campuses and led by the students. And this is the historic fact which actually I hardly see any writings around that where they highlight this fact. And it has a similar reflection in India as well at the same time when Telangana movement started in late 60s. And so I was always looking at that connection. So now when in the American context, it was a battle by the students. It was a battle against institutional racism and the campaign for women's right in education. So I think it was the emergence of the new left. I'm sure you must have heard the idea of new left, and the popular scholar, the profound scholar C. Wright Mills, who emerged as the icon of this ideological change. A student activist whom I met several times, interviewed, and we are also publishing together, called Mark Rudd, who became the face of the International Free Speech Movement of 1960, was part of a student democratic society. It's called Student for a Democratic Society, SDS, and then led the entire free speech movement in Columbia University. He says that we were fighting for the representation of Black students in university campuses, right, in those days. Despite the fact that Black students, they played a significant role in the struggle for freedom, and also the Black women, which have been rarely featured in the narrative of campus activism. right? So now, one of the most enduring legacy, I would say, of 1960s can be found in the curriculum of the US universities, right, and colleges. These institutions after the 60s featured black studies course, programs, departments, and center. Now, the rise of black studies directly influenced the arrival of women's studies and ethnic studies. So, what we see now in terms of women's studies, etc., is the result of that struggle of the 60s by those students. So, and now looking at the 21st century America, as of recent data, if I present you in 2016, almost 80 universities and colleges face the demand of protesting students and the similar kind of issues. So the demand of these newer agitation, what you see around, and addresses these themes of the past, again increasing the black and Latino part representation on campuses. So now, as an institution or organization, the university works as a what scholars call a form of mediation between theory and practice, right? So there is a symbiotic and reciprocal relationship between university and society. That's what scholars say. So now, when I say here talk about campus resistance, I am not putting all the burden only on students. I am also talking about teachers. Again, going back in 60s, the teachers were the first public sector workers to take more militant actions to further their goals. It was a very popular strike in 1960 where teachers were fighting for, of course, salary increase and work rules and everything, but they were fighting shoulder to shoulder with the local sanitation worker. And that's, I think, a very historic example of that inspired a new wave of public sector strike in the 60s, and led to many other public sector employees like postal worker strike and all those. And these were student and teachers played a crucial role in making that. So in other words, I think apart from the survival issue, there were race was an inescapable issues in the public culture of 60s, right? And could never be far from the surface. So how far, thinking of that time America, how far the white majority was willing to go to eliminate the discrimination practiced against the black minority remained an open question, and how bigotry might be reduced offered no obvious solution. Now think of the Indian situation. When US was fighting for feminism and gay rights, Indian university youth were struggling for their survival, the issues of survival, basic issues of food and lodging in the hostels and all those issues. But in many parts of India in the 60s, youth were also becoming an inspiration for, or the Western struggle actually inspired the Indian youth. The Telangana movement that I studied is the best example of youth aspiration when Osmania students put forward the demand for the separate statehood of Telangana. I think the history of global student movement shows that the university has been fighting for its existence and autonomy while challenging the existing tradition in the form of knowledge production. Now link with this whole emergence of gay, lesbian, black studies, women's studies. This is the knowledge production that started through movement, right? And then came in academia. In a way, so that is the link I was kind of interested in, that how does it work? And all of these student protests were not possible without the university, because university provided a common space, a common platform to fight against the systemic injustice. Now we have so many platforms. We have social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc., which is the in a way expanded the horizon. But again, if you think of this is governed by the internet, which is again another capitalistic tool, and students are using this tool very effectively. But when you think of non-university spaces, many of these students who are very active on campuses, when they go back home, they don't have the proper access of all these technology. In other words, there is a huge digital divide that we live in. And in that context, if you see, universities provide, say, homogeneous access to students. And that's why I see universities as a possibility or a possible site of resistance. And the another thing I look at university is that university offers a space for imagination. I still remember that it was my first semester in MA in JNU when student union took us to KC Market in that open theater, and we were watching this Amir Khan's movie. I forgot the name, but yeah, it was but watching this was so liberating, so emancipatory. So, and I was kind of, now I think that why 60s was very important, and now why spaces like JNU are very important, because you are creating a new imagination where cinema without walls, kind of redefining the concept of theater, right? So these kind of spaces are kind of, are available in the campus. When you talk particularly about India, there has been a ideological setback to scientific thinking and science in past few decades, and it has been redefined nowadays in a way where the political class has been imposing their version of science, right? And their version of rationality. It's completely okay. We are talking about the common masses, which are governed by these traditional beliefs and superstition or blind faith. But but when you see, so these common masses who are governed by these, and the reflection of this, you can see that, how these thousands of gurus and babas are, through their tantrums are running the whole social life. But university is not a social culture or a religious body which is free of to hold, partisan belief. It is a place where scholars, through their scientific research, challenge the existing social, cultural, and political beliefs. In this sense also, I see university as a site of scientific thinking, right? So in a way, there are several ways to look at the university space, which is so liberating, the space which has a power, the power that empowers you, right? That empowers students. And in my, because I've been studying university space since 2010, since my MPhil time, when I was studying the emergence of the identity-based politics in campus. And I can tell you that for many, I don't know whether this now that generation enters in campus or not, but in those days, in 90s, when the first generation from the lower caste were entering, I met people who said that university, I said, how do you remember your alma mater? He said, I remember it is a space where I got first time in my life full 3 times meal. So I'm saying that generation was also there, and for them, imagine looking from that point of view, that how liberating it is for them. And so in other words, again, that this is, when I say resistance, it has several meanings. It's not just about shouting slogan, it is about, resisting within, resistance within, and many other forms of imagination. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, thank you for that answer. Actually, it was, you basically have summed up everything there. Now, taking from what you've just said and also referring to your book and what you've written there, Gaurav, can you speak about a little more on how, the understanding of campuses or university life, how, the traditional class analysis, which you write, becomes redundant in studying, student movements and protests in the recent times. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Thank you, Deepali. See, I have recently, 2 years ago, I was doing another field work in Delhi, and there, after studying those campuses, I concluded that and of course my other work in southern part of India, I believe that what we call this or use this word campus culture in India. I think in Indian context, campus culture is primarily the caste culture. And when you start studying it, you will see that how the grouping is formed, how the networking is formed. This is primarily the like what network are you part of. So in that way, there is caste comes as a strong analysis form of analysis. Now, what happened, as I was earlier saying, that a generation a first generation learner, when they started entering in the higher education, I that from that onwards, now they have created a new narrative especially after the OBC reservation in 2006. So now we have a significant number of lower caste students who are providing a kind of very counter narratives, and which is created by these historically marginalized students, and in response to the hegemonic narrative of caste. For the first time in the history of university politics, university politics, the students from historically marginalized groups, which is scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and OBCs, have taken the lead in raising critical questions on Indian caste culture, traditions, or religious beliefs, practices. Uh, and this critique comes from both left and right ideologies. Now, in order to remain relevant and part of the emergent and alternative narratives, students organizations from left to right have responded to these narratives by adopting various degrees of altering in their ideologies. Now, you know that being a JNU, that how from in last 20 years, how left has changed its ideological language, right? So how Ambedkar all of a sudden became, the major icon in campuses like JNU, HCU, and many other in FLU and all. So now this what I would say that when you're talking about the class, I see caste class in a way as kind of the in a such a interlinked category which you cannot separate, because the thing is there is always this been debate between Marxism and Dalits about the issue of caste, where they see class as a main factor. Now, for academics, this debate is not new, though the class discourse of the left has always been dominant, right? That both the recent movement, you will say the Rohit Vemula's, post-Rohit Vemula, and also the JNU Ajadi movement have brought together discourses of caste and class. And that's what I'm arguing in my upcoming paper. Then this marked the unity among the oppressed groups in Indian society that gave them a new voice. The emergence of BAPSA, Birsa Phule Ambedkar Association, Student Association at JNU is also is one of the examples that it shows a major shift in the historical process of identity assertion, right? And for the first time in the central universities of Gujarat, the BAPSA actually won the student union elections in alliance with left unions, right? This I'm trying to understand this, how it is working. The range of their radical cultural perspective and politics can be seen in their inclusion of other socially marginalized groups such as LGBTQ. That is another discourse actually, which is also very new in campuses like JNU. So this is one of the many examples that how identity resistance politics occurring across the country, along with the assertion of Dalit OBC students. They're taking the center stage in the university campuses in India. And another point I want to highlight, when you see that how it is also how caste is kind of having a global approach because of these global alliances of lower caste Dalit students with the black students, right? And how class, it's in a way this whole idea of social justice is going beyond national boundaries and nationalist discourse on or oversimplifying the class struggle. right? And so Dalit students, I think, with their cultural and intellectual resources and skills, which is they acquired through university education and the socio-political activism, they now are ventured to construct subaltern history. It's the we keep hearing that now boycotting many mainstream Hindu festivals and writing a new history, cultural memory, and the identities that by using resources, not only from what is assumed to be their unique cultural tradition of suffering, but also from Hindu traditions and prevailing nationalist discourse. I think in that context, their activism has expanded the horizon of democratic struggle by questioning religious tradition and cultural practices. In other words, through their activism, Dalit OBC students have changed the traditional face of what you call the public space or the public sphere. Their activism in one of the cultural sociologists called Jeffrey Alexander, in if I use his word, his terminology, Dalit OBC student activism would be an act of civil repair, he said. And rather, so they in a way, rather they see it as an ideological strategy of appropriating the radical promises and historical obligation of these movements and different social groups. So I just wanted to highlight that when I say that class has become written, I'm not saying that it's written, but it's kind of it is coming in a very different form now, and the idea is because we are now thinking along this line that university, if we believe that university is a democratic institution, so then you talk about these different identities, and the fact is that class notion, which entered in through globalization, through privatization, the fact is that universities all around the world have been in the grip of something of an existential crisis for some time now, and because of the McDonaldization of education, that term, market-oriented education. So now this whole emphasis on the production-driven success becomes the primary agenda of innovation universities, right? So, but that is kind of creating a new class, which is a digital class we deal with, right? And this notion of class is becoming so complex now that, first of all, it's hard to define class these days, right? Because all those different categories, different characteristics what we have now, all those things are in a way, if you think in material aspect, many of then again the class becomes confused. Class confuses itself. But this traditional Marxian notion of looking at class, I think, has completely changed now, and that is why you see the emergence of identity-based movement, caste, LGBT, regional, and other forms of identities are challenging the class notions. I think that's what I would say.
So, speaking about changes, and you've sort of, brought in everything together, but now we have something called the new education policy, which has been just, like pushed ahead, as well as COVID-19 and online classes. So, do you see that? Do you feel that whatever progress that we had made in terms of, bringing the caste question to the fore, or the people coming from those marginalized backgrounds, actually, finding their space, how do you see these things changing in the aftermath of the NEP and as well as online classes?
Thank you, Rituparna. I think, yeah, this is a very prominent question of the time. When I think of NEP, I recall Paulo Freire, who once said that the most difficult thing about theory is about practice. Now, India on paper and on ground, in the same way, constitution in reality, right, are two different things. And the real world is kind of exasperating. NEP, I think, since the time of Kothari Commission, has been all these kind of commissions and came until NEP, you see, has been promising a kind of heaven for education. Now, the policy, current policy is based on the pillars of access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability. These 4 or 5 words that if we summarize, and they said will transform India into a vibrant knowledge hub. That's what our Prime Minister's promises. Now, the promise is to bring innovation, diversity, and inclusion. These are another, so again, these words like sound so, they sound so heavenly again, that this seems like a big dream. But, but when you see in practice, in reality, government has completely omitted many of these things from, like, say, for example, critical thinking, the word we use. Again, the buzzword, but in reality, they have deleted chapters on social movements, right? Now, without social movement, how will you bring critical thinking? They've deleted chapter on federalism, citizenship, nationalism, and secularism completely from class 11, political science syllabus, right? So again, it appears good in theory, sounds good to hear, but in reality, what government is doing is basically working against this notion. And so this is one point. Another is when you think of India is now aspiring to be the big partner in all these world-class universities and global ranking and all. Except the metro cities in higher education, I think the state of higher education in different states are very, it's in a poor state. But India have this approach that you have this word called blame the victim, right? So people who, and this is the kind of, again, comes from this merit-based approach, that if you are not successful, if you don't do well, then it's your fault, right? And they don't realize that the people who are coming to higher education, I am surprised to see that even now in 21st century, when you study social science and you meet people from lower caste, they are still, I see this, the first generation learner entering in the higher education. So it means the inclusion policy did not work for in past 70 years, or maybe it's not as effective because government is not paying attention. And on the other hand, you can also see the representation wise, how many faculties are there. Like I can say in my experience, my entire education experience, I think 98% of my faculty members were the upper caste, right? So where are the people whom we call the socially or historically marginalized people, right? So now when you don't bring teachers from the lower caste, how and then you are surrounded by only by upper caste, so how many of them actually in reality understand what does it mean to be a Dalit or a tribe or an OBC in India, right? How do caste identities gets constructed in teachers as well as in students' minds, right? How does all of these affect the way of being a teacher or a student? I strongly believe that all upper caste teachers should go through a caste conscious training where they can understand their privilege, right? So that is one thing which actually I strongly highlight in all the when I talk to young scholars. So unfortunately, it is still a very teacher-centric policy, where guru-centric policy. It should be a student-centric education, student-centric policy. Now, this is one aspect at the outer levels. When you see the inside perspective, where is the representation of lower caste or the marginalized people in curriculum? In the beginning, I gave you an example of Black studies and gender women's studies. So here you have all these branches in the West, in all the universities, you see there is a emphasis on the Black studies, and there's a special funding given to. In fact, there is a policy that you have to hire an Afro-American to teach these courses. So, but do we have the same kind of policies in India for almost 50% of population, include OBCs? So where are those people, right? So we have around 500 vice chancellors now in total, and out of that only 6 SC or 6 ST. And total, I think less than 35 OBC vice chancellors. So where do they, all these promises of representation, of inclusion? So on the one hand, we strive for the government strive for the upliftment of the weaker section, and on the other hand, there is a gross discrimination in the distribution of opportunities to the voiceless section of the society. So this become even more critical to have a Dalit or a tribal administrator after experiencing what happened with Rohit Vemulas in HCU, right? But government has not taken that step. So I believe that curriculum is the mirror that reflects the social and historical realities of India, right? Instead of paying homage to these icons like Ambedkar, Phule, and this legacy, government is kind of, it keeps removing these subaltern history from the textbook. Now, still when you read school textbook, it's still the Arjun Eklavya story is still told from the eyes of Dronacharya. Rarely do we see being discussed from the Eklavya's perspective. So stories like, I think I personally believe that in the recent stories, like, you have this guy from Odisha, who was was running, called Budhia Singh, right? I think, and then you have, he's called Marathon Boy, right? And then you have this brilliant, I think, the most unique story which you have known, the most unique love story in the form of Mountain Man, Dashrath Manji. I think these kind of things should be part of our syllabus, where you see how a Dashrath Manji's kind of incredible, I think I would say, feat of breaking down a mountain to ensure that village could access education and healthcare is, where are these in the syllabus, right? And what do we read in this? And then another important, very, very important point, the issues of mental health. Where we don't have even this word in Indian policies, right? They don't even pay attention. Now we have such a large higher education system, right? But in the past, especially 20 years or 25 years, in the name of access, equity, quality, and ranking, these 4 words, right? Access, equity, quality, and ranking. We have been ignoring the internal realities. In the past 3 years, Deepali, 2,400 students dropped out of IITs, and nearly half of them were scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. Now, and this is the government data. It's not my data. Government minister presented in the Rajya Sabha that from 2014 to 16, 3 years, 26,500 students have committed suicide, right, in India. And he presented in the parliament, but I don't see any, government taking any stock on that. So this mad rush for engineering and medical education have been kind of leading to even more losses of young lives. 13 years ago, when Professor Thorat's committee report informed the government about the situation of this discrimination and growing suicide among Dalits and Adivasis in elite institutions, but even the then government, Congress government, has ignored that report. So it is not about, I think, the current government or the previous government. It's the overall this mentality of the ruling hegemonic class that there is no policy in place, right? So now let me give you one example that with this more emphasis on technical education, I'm kind of afraid that higher education is completely losing its focus. Now we are inspiring to go to moon, right? We are doing all those things to, developing the scientific technique, but there is no training or education where engineers could imagine a better life for, for their own fellow citizens by using their technical skills. Now, governments spend ample amount of money in making Indian engineers, right? And you know that our engineers have established the Silicon Valley in California and doing really great. But and recently government spent around 2,000 crore rupees to land on the lunar surface. But in past one decade, more than 1,000 people died while cleaning the manhole. Right? You see, the contrast, because the profession of manual scavenging is linked with the lower caste. None of these upper caste teachers or educationists, our even JNU, our own JNU professors, and sociologists never actually talk about this policy, or any policy member even never raise the issue that is linked directly to stigma, discrimination, and as a matter of fact, it's such a heinous practice of manual scavenging, which was banned in 1993. Now, school classroom, when you see, or university classroom, of course there are people who are now coming from this community, but in the name of dignity or equality, none of these educationists ever raise the issue as kind of in their critical pedagogy or teaching practices. IITs, which are known for their best brains, they have never invented any machine to clean the sewage, rather than they're dumping the direct human body. So I think these things, which when you look at, so there's a big mismatch. And another example from NEP I wanted to highlight, that this mad rush for English language. Very latest data I wanted to give you. In 2019, you know that just in UP, Uttar Pradesh, 10 lakh students failed the Hindi board exam. Right? So now, first of all, like, who is going to government school and who is going to Hindi medium? That also shows a class factor here, right? So it is all the lower caste who are failing. So now you are not giving them even Hindi proper, and they cannot go to English. So where would they? So it's a kind of a big challenge for that. You are basically making a coming generation voiceless generation. They will have no voice without language. And then you think of the tribal languages. There is this guy, I'm forgetting his name, a very I think last name is Devi, but he's the linguist who is part of the People's Linguist Survey of India. He said,
Devi,
yeah. So he said around around 600 of the tribal languages have died in past few years. So and he said another 250 will die in next 50 years. So these are, I think, the issues that government needs to take care, and there are serious challenge. Then the last point I wanted to highlight about NEP is that issue of autonomy. Now, with this recent attack on the free speech, you have observing in the newspaper, and that again goes in contrast with this whole buzzword and the ideal word of autonomy. In reality, it is not happening, right? So I think the pedagogy in the university should have an emancipatory goal with a freedom to be critical, and the government should provide these spaces of critical voices and the free speech, and that is not happening. So yeah, these are some of the points I wanted to highlight about NEP.
Thank you, Gaurav, for that answer. Again, you've not just talked about the NEP, but some very important questions which have been there for years and still unaddressed, and still the need to look into it. Not just at the level of policy, but within our own university spaces. How do we address these questions? Now, finally, to you, our question is, so, your work is on student protests and resistances, and you said that the movements which happen in universities, they involve different sections, including faculty, etc. But our question is related to students, because you've studied student leaders on campus. So 2 questions related to that. One is, what constitutes a student leader? How does a student leader become a student leader, or how does a student become a student leader? One is that. And then second, related to this, is the question on your research and your field work. So studying, how did you go about with your field work, and how your ethnographic study of student protests, and what are the challenges of doing such a study? So if you could throw some light on these 2 questions.
Thank you, Deepali. I think when you talk about the making of a student activist, as I highlighted in the beginning, that how spaces are very important. So all these spaces that you see, like inside university campuses, like say for example, a classroom is one space, but that's a very formal space, right? So, but the non-formal space or informal space are where actually all the social education happens, where you have this the idea of activism. So I try to explore all those spaces. Either it is hostel, dining hall, and the very important space which is historically also very important, these dhaba spaces, the chai places, right? So in the West, you would call it cafe space, which is, emergence of cafes in Europe. There's so much literature written on it, and very interesting. And I recently reviewed a book on cafe space where one of the title was called "Without the Cafe, would there have been a Karl Marx or Jean-Paul Sartre?" So all these big names you think of, they are the product of this cafe culture. Again, another space which is important. So because in these cafe space, people don't just go to drink chai, right? They also, these spaces are spaces of thinking, right? And that's where network happens. That's where and this is not just about JNUs. You take of Allahabad University, BHU, Osmania University. Absolutely, I've been to many campuses and I've seen that same kind of that how these spaces played an important, essential role in mass movement. And Telangana, I think, is the best example. That's what I studied in my book and wrote a whole chapter, give a lot of emphasis on that, how this dhaba, this kind of uncemented structure, and that's where this networking happens. So networking, I think, is very important part of any social movement. And as I was saying, that most of it is region-based or caste-based networking, and at some extent class, but region and caste always overtakes. So I think within now we have looked at the formal space and non-formal space. Now, informal space has a very wide reach. It is not just limited to the boundaries of campus. I have studied in Osmania. There were like all the other bastis around, colonies around. Now here we have, like, say for example, Munirka. Now this Munirka and JNU relationship is very strong, and so here you are expanding these cafe spaces or dhaba spaces to Munirka, and this is again that symbiotic relationship scholars call, and that's where networking happens. So then there are ideological networking, right? Apart from the interpersonal networking, there is ideological networking that also kind of happens in these spaces. Where else it would be, right? So many of the social movement scholars, those who try to highlight these facts, and they say that when a new student entering the campus, he comes with his own kind of, it may be caste baggage, regional baggage, and basically in a way he reproduces that unless he kind of mixes with the new student. How over a period of time, how university space, these spaces, how influence his or her thinking, right? And that goes on, right? As an ethnographer, for me, it was very interesting that how these spaces basically contributing to the understanding of a movement. That uh, so in that context, I feel like ethnographer is also, it works like a spy, you know, and one has to kind of sacrifice many comfort when as an ethnographer. Like if I go more in detail, like say for example, if you are not a smoker and now you have to work with activists and you have allergy of smoke with cigarettes, so how would you handle that? Now it means that then you are a failed ethnographer, right? You have to develop those uh, strategy, like otherwise it will be a drawback of research. So uh, I think then it in a way ethnography gives you a lot of these challenges as well as adventures, and um, and it's kind of that what you call the serendipity. You just go there and you feel that you devise a new strategy. So there is no clear cut rules for ethnography, that how it works. Like when I was studying some Delhi university campuses, and I started following, like I was interviewing these people, these young students, and about their relationship, about their social views and all. But then eventually I started, so I had their numbers, phone numbers, and I used to call them. Then it just occurred to me that when I started looking at their WhatsApp status, that was kind of complete. It was going in contrast with what they said in interviews. So I started following the WhatsApp status for 6 months, and that gave me a very new observation about that how do people behave. Like people who would say that, oh, I have, I'm very popular here, I have so many girlfriends and I have this, and but in their WhatsApp status would say lonely in the crowd. So what does it say, right? So when you start following, and these people, they change their WhatsApp status every day. So now status, either Facebook status or WhatsApp, it's part of your identity, right? That's what you want to present, and your real identity might be different. So in a way, all these kind of contradictions and complexity one can understand through ethnography when really you are there and uh, kind of meeting them. So, as I was just giving an example of dhaba culture, that I was doing this ethnography, and I was spending so much time and in drinking those almost with no taste of chai, and spending time with these people. But that is what I think gave me a lot of patience and understand like how things work, and is a kind of understood cafe as a sphere of, of, of private people coming together as public, right? So how the private people raise this public discussion. So how private issues sometimes take over the political one. So all these dynamics, then you realize there. And I think it makes me believe that as an ethnographer, one needs to spend longer time in the field to get a clear picture. I think what we are doing nowadays in research is a kind of it's a patchwork we do. Spend 6 months or 1 year and then come up with a conclusion. I think that first the previous generations or the earlier generation of scholars who used to come and spend decades. Of course, now we don't have those resources, but I think that's what the real ethnography means now. And now, because we don't have time, and that's why we have these now, we have digital ethnography, right? We have cyber ethnography, we have auto ethnography, thousands of techniques we have developed to kind of minimize our struggle. And we live in, so I would say ethnographer is now living in their comfort zones, and we are day by day we are becoming armchair sociologists. So I think ethnography should open up and new challenges, and that's the way to go for to understand sociology.
Okay, thank you, Gaurav. So actually, to our viewers, we also have a What is Ethnography series. So whoever is interested in using it as a method of research please pay heed to what Gaurav just said about blending in with your respondents and how to do ethnography. So, since we've come to the end, we wanted to end with, any suggestions that you might have for young people, young students of sociology, young researchers. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Rituparna. I think I am also a student and I'm a researcher myself. So I just want to say to myself as well that we need to spend more time in the field work, and that is what is missing in the. And it is kind of no faults of its own. It's just the norm now, and there are several larger structural factors that fit in because we don't have proper funding, we don't have proper time to devote. So my wish is that every student of sociology could spend more time in the field work and less time in the library. That is what I think equally or the equal time in field work and library. I see many of the departments are in India are almost at the stage at the verge of death because there is no new work coming up. There's no field work based coming up. And as a result, we don't have good studies. We don't have any theory. You tell me like how, what conceptual framework are we using? And I have been to several state universities. They have not even a proper guidance of like what is the theoretical paradigm? What is the how do you do literature review? I think also people like you, me, who were privileged in joining as in JNU kind of university, we should also start this series where we can guide the students studying in these small universities or colleges. I have seen the pathetic condition where they don't get any guidance because of course teachers are also not interested, and there is hardly, and I can tell you these thousands of funny stories where people have, sociology students have no idea, never heard of sea-light mills. I mean, how can you do sociology without studying the sociological imagination? So I think this is, and I'm telling you, government is not going to do it. Should be our responsibility to guide the younger generation and help them in what we know and spread that knowledge of sociology.
So thank you so much, Gaurav, for taking time out from your very busy schedule and doing this interview with Doing Sociology. And you have raised some very important points and questions, which we can relate to so much because we are also, we've been in university spaces and more so JNU because we talk about higher education in India and the situation, whether it concerns student politics or, larger issues about curriculum, etc. So I think this interview addresses all of that. And for people who are interested in doing a study such as yours, I think they'll draw a lot from this interview. So thank you once again for doing this with us.
Thank you, Rituparna. Yeah, it's a lovely catching up with you guys. And I'm very hopeful that if you are taking lead, I'm sure there is a good future